When I think of emotional blackmail, I think of the many experiences I've had with it where somebody essentially tried to use the threat of making me feel very badly about myself to coerce me into giving them what they wanted. And I myself am admittedly guilty of having done that in the past. But nevertheless, one such example comes to mind from a couple years ago when I was being rather aggressively romantically pursued by a woman whose strategy to win me over was to emotionally blackmail me. So if I didn't respond fast enough, as fast as she wanted me to, or I didn't express enough enthusiasm over us hanging out, then she would start texting me, calling me out, asking me loaded questions like, why don't you care? Or telling me that I was making her cry and things like that. And so as you might have guessed, as the weeks went by, ultimately I ended up turning her down because in my opinion, using emotional blackmail to get what you want from people is rather deplorable. And in this video, I'm going to illustrate why by talking about the implications it has in those situations where someone doesn't suspect that that's what you're trying to do, followed by the implications in those situations where somebody does know that that's what you're trying to do, and then propose what I think a better strategy actually is. So in those cases, when someone doesn't suspect that what you're really doing is emotionally blackmailing them, and again, using the threat of those negative emotions to force them to give you what you want, then it usually will work, and you might actually end up getting what you want. But it's only in some senses, because again, there are a few implications here that might not be so obvious, namely the ethical considerations. So I'd argue that it's morally reprehensible at best to be imposing what essentially amounts to pain and suffering on somebody else for no more of a justifiable reason than you just wanting something for yourself. But also, you can't really trust the authenticity of that person's ensuing actions, those things that they do for you, that they're doing them because they actually like you and they're doing them voluntarily because they want to make you happy, versus them just doing them involuntarily because they're afraid of you and whatever punishment you're going to impose if they don't keel over and give you what you want. If it were me, I would want somebody to be the former, to be involved in a relationship with me because they actually like me, to be doing it voluntarily, and because they want to make me happy, not because I somehow force them to do that. But the latter is usually how that's going to end up panning out if you are going around emotionally blackmailing people. And you're more than likely going to attract a certain type of person. Someone who's probably not very confident, who is very insecure, doesn't know how to stand up for themselves or ask for what they want, who's also probably very approval-seeking and might even pay too much attention to you and constantly have a need for you to reassure them that you're not mad at them. And not only is that very unattractive, but it's also very cumbersome and annoying because you're going to be the one that's calling the shots at every step of the way and dictating what direction that relationship's going to go. Because again, they're not going to stand up and speak out for themselves and say, no, I think we should go this direction instead, out of fear of upsetting you or disagreeing with you. Now, on the other hand, sometimes people will suspect that that's really what you're trying to do. Like, I can tell when someone's go-to strategy for getting what they want from me is to just throw a fit. And so again, there are many implications here you have to be aware of, namely the impression you're setting on other people. So you are coming across as very immature, for one, because like I've said many times over, only children don't know how to use anything besides anger and aggression in order to get what they want. It's also coming across as very disrespectful because there's no regard for the toll that those negative emotions are taking on the other person. And there's not a whole lot of credibility that you have. Because over time, the more you do that, the more the other person's going to pick up on the fact that you really just want what you want and you don't care about the greater good. You don't care about what they want or how they feel. And so eventually your arguments aren't going to really be taken seriously. And we talked about attraction a minute ago. I, alongside most of the people, I'm not attracted to emotional blackmailers. Someone who basically expects me to be their babysitter, like the person I described in the beginning, or who expects me to be their slave. And so the way that I'm going to respond to that is by not giving that person what they want, so as to not encourage that emotional blackmail by showing them that it works, and instead to teach them a little bit of respect. So it would follow naturally then that I would suggest that a better alternative to communicating your needs and getting what you want from people is to be respectful. So politely ask if someone will be willing to accommodate you in a certain way, express consideration for how they feel and listen to them, and be willing to compromise instead of just being totalitarian and expecting that at all costs you be given what you want. And don't forget to have something to offer in exchange. Because you can't just expect something without doing that, because then people will look at that and say, there's nothing in it for me. Like that example I talked about earlier, when she asked me to say, text her back fast enough or demanded that I do that, my first response was no, because I don't really see anything in it for me. You're not really offering anything in return. So at the end of the day, you can't force people to give you what you want. So instead of going down that road, try being reasonable in the way that we talked about. And if that's still not working out for you, then wish that person the best and move on and find a better relationship where your needs will actually be fulfilled. And this applies to every type of relationship. I'm not just talking about romantic partnerships. So hope this helps, and I'll see you in the next video.